Come on in, scoot in. All right, that video was for VBS. It's a little teaser of what we're doing this summer, and so I wanted to show that to all of you kids before we dismiss you guys, which will happen in just a second, because July 17th, we are kicking off our VBS this year, and it is for all people. It's a family VBS, and so if you have kids, of course, you should bring them because we're going to have a ton of fun, and we're going to learn about how we follow Jesus. Just totally forgot the slogan, the tagline. Follow Jesus here, there, and everywhere. There we go. And but if you want to just serve alongside these kids, it's a great time as well. And so it's going to be in the evenings, so after you get off work, for about an hour and a half, and I want to encourage you guys to start registering and putting that on your schedule, because we have had a blast the last couple of years doing this, where we get to play and have fun alongside of the kids of our church. And so at the end of service, we will have a QR code up there on the screens for you guys to scan to find the registration for that, so you can start signing up. But start thinking about who you might invite as well, because just because those kids don't come to our church doesn't mean they can't participate. Last year, we invited some of my nieces and nephews who drove all the way across town and had a great time participating with us. Okay? All right, this morning we're doing something a little bit different. That's why we have all these people, all these beautiful people behind me here. We are going to be wrapping up our parenting series with a panel. And so the last couple of weeks, you guys have submitted questions for us to ask them, to hear how we can lead, guide, parent, encourage, love on our kids. And they are going to share some of their wisdom with us here today. So let me introduce them, and then we'll get started. But first, I always forget, I'm getting a signal from the back. Kiddos, you guys are dismissed. If you're in grade school and want to go with Roberto, who is raising his hand, he's going to take you guys over through the 1st through 6th grade class. If you're in high school, some of those guys already headed over here towards our prayer room with Christy to do the high school stuff. If you kids want to just hang with us, you're welcome to do so as well. Okay? All right, let's do some introductions here real quick. The panel behind me consists of my dad. My mom couldn't be here because she is sick this morning, but this is Dean Schifferer, my dad. Then we have, give him a round of applause. Then we have Allan and Tammy Fuller right here in the blue. These guys pastored the church, Mountain Park Church, that I was a part of growing up, and really helped me fall in love with church. And so they are very near and dear to my heart. They have 3 kids, kind of in the college age years. Sorry, my dad has 3 kids as well. We're kind of in the young parent stage of years. And then right here in the white shirt is Gary Kinnaman. Gary Kinnaman has kids who are grown and very successful in their careers and stuff. And he has been a pastor for many years as well, and he's going to share some wisdom with us. And then, what? I was pastor right here. Right here. Yeah, right here. Some of you may know Gary. And then last but not least is the Vaca family. This is Jessie and Carla. Jessie and Carla are part of the coaching team that help influence me and help me grow as I'm pastoring this church. But they are doing a great job with 3 high school age kids right now. So we kind of have a spread of our panel here and what they're going to be able to teach us. So the way this is going to work this morning is I'm going to ask questions, and I'm going to get out of the way and let them pass a microphone around, and we're going to try to cover as many of the questions as you guys submitted as we can this morning. And so I'm going to call on my dad first. Make you kick this off again. My dad, Dean Schifferer here. I want to ask you, how do you reinforce God's value with your kids regarding things like premarital sex, promiscuity, the value of marriage, etc., even when the secular world has very opposing values to what the church teaches?
Well, to Susie and I, the basic premise to parenting well is be very intentional. And so we sought the wisdom of people like on this team right here frequently, and one of the things that I did as a homeschool dad was I researched what was being said out there in the Christian community, and read all the books, and then I boiled that down to a paper, about a 20-page paper, and I said, this is kind of how the Schifferers see it happening. And all 3 of our kids did it differently, but it was the concept of teaching them that dating is something that's relatively new in the course of history, and it's not working well, and people don't learn to respect one another, and going into a relationship with the idea that this is all about how can we get to know one another very respectfully, and then let it grow from there, and then having very intentional dates. So we addressed that, and we talked about staying pure. It was okay. It's okay to say that, parents. You know what I mean? And I get to tell people all the time, regularly, one of the greatest achievements in life, I got married at 25, a virgin. It was a huge accomplishment. And God helped me. He protected me. And, and Susie and my relationship is at a place it couldn't have been had I been used. That's the way I believe anyway.
Thanks. So, one of the things, I'm going to just tag on to his question and nobody else's this morning. One of the things that my parents did really well is they always reinforced what we stand for and what the best option is, not just telling us what not to do. And so they gave us a path, they gave us an option, a direction to follow. And so thanks, Dad, for that. All right, next question, and this will kind of flow out of this one nicely. I'm gonna pose this one to Jessie and Carla. A lot of times we as young parents have a difficulty in our relationships with other parents because we choose to parent our kids differently, different parenting style, different values. And so how do you navigate those relationships with people who parent very differently than you or have different values in the way they parent their kids?
I was hoping you weren't going to ask us this question. You want to answer this? You want me to? Oh, thanks a lot, right? Well, I'll be honest, since I'm on stage and in church. We have not been good at this. There are seasons of our lives where, we believe so much in community and we believe so much in relationships with one another that we just figure out a way to work past it or to see past it. There have been other stages of our lives where we're like, listen, we can't hang out with those people. Just because it's so difficult for whatever we're going through or whatever our family's journeying through, we just, at some point, I think we've gotten to the place where we know whatever season that we're in, if we need to protect our time and our family more, then we have to create some distance. But if we're at a space where, we're good as a family and our marriage is good and we're super strong and things are firing all cylinders, then we can let some of those people closer and not to change them or teach them anything different, but because we love and value community and relationships so much. So that probably wasn't an awesome answer, but
I will say.
Yeah, go ahead.
So there were times that we would actually use it as teachable moments for our kids, because our kids would see other kids, how they were acting, and they're like, why are those kids acting that way? And we would just say, well, this is why we have taught you guys that X, Y, and Z. So I think we use it as teachable moments for our kids.
Appreciate that. Oh, you can give them a round of applause. Thank you.
Yeah, she saved it, obviously. You can tell. Appreciate that.
Yeah, that can be a challenging one because we've even run into conflict with even some of my siblings where just in the differences, it can make family gatherings challenging or that kind of stuff. And so it's worth investing in the relationships.
And I think in terms of the teachable moment thing, to be able to have that conversation with your kids hey, that doesn't mean they're bad parents or they're bad kids or anything like that. This is what our family values. Mm-hmm. We have that conversation all the time. Yeah. Hey, in our family, this is what's important. In our family, this is how we treat each other, and this is how we communicate. And it doesn't make anybody else's family wrong. This is what's important to us.
Yeah.
So,
appreciate it. Thank you, guys. All right. So, staying on the kind of the conflict train with this next question, Allan and Tammy. This next question comes up for a lot of people, and it's a parenting question, but it also makes it very challenging for our marriages when we start parenting because we were all raised differently. And we might have different opinions even with our spouse in a situation, in a moment of how that should be handled. And so how do you navigate those differences of opinion or different parenting styles with your spouse in the moment, in the heat of the moment of that disagreement?
That's tough. As much as possible, we try to talk about parenting philosophies ahead of time, but you're right, there are times when you just can't. And I think we just let whoever's in charge of that moment, like if I'm negotiating something with, he'll let me do it, and vice versa. And then we'll talk about it after. We don't talk about it in the midst of it or contradict one another, because we're on the same team no matter what. And that's what I...
Absolutely, yeah. That I would say the exact same thing, that for the most part, we're going to be on the same page with a lot of the decisions we make. But if we're not, whoever starts talking first gets to make the call in that moment. And then the other person just, I totally agree. We're going to talk about this afterwards, you know.
Susie would say we would make eye contact and we'd actually leave the room. And then, because we want to come out of the other room now holding hands and saying, this is our position and we're together on this, and you're not going to work one of us against the other.
Yeah, good call.
Yeah, and I would sometimes, so particularly when the kids got older and they were wiser to all of this pathway, and so they would ask something, multiple times I would say, you know what, I got to talk to Mom about that before I respond. So then they go, oh, okay, so Mom's really in charge. And yeah. But it would be, I'm not ready to back something up right now. We're going to have to figure it out together.
Cool. Thank you. All right, Gary, this next one's for you. So being on the same page with your spouse is a really key piece to parenting. And that isn't always an option for all, because divorces do happen and stuff, but in order to stay on the same page, the date, the time together, the one-on-one is super, super important. And so how did you guys prioritize date nights with your spouse? How did you make that happen when you were parenting young children, working full-time? What were your keys to carving out that time?
I can't remember back that far. Okay. It's really hard. It's hard to remember all that, just how we did what we did. And, my wife and I are very different in our approach to life. I'm a type A person. I like to say I'm a man of God, and my wife Marilyn is a saint. And she has become more saintly, living year after year with me. And so we generally somehow, they're fundamental family values, and we came from very similar families, and so, I tended to over discipline. She tended to under discipline, and we had to work on that. But I can't. I'll say this, that you have to, and this is just an old guy looking back, okay, you have to live life one day at a time. And Jesus said, don't be, what was the phrase, how he said that, the trouble of today is enough. Yeah. That's my paraphrase. Don't worry about tomorrow. And I think I said this in the first service to the looking back on my life. It's so, we get so used to believing in Jesus and going to church, but we don't really live like God is present with us in our homes. And so my wife and I, we've had differences, and I want to say this again. This is not really in response to your question, but home for us was not church. We didn't turn our family into church, and I didn't quote scripture to get my kids to do what I wanted them to do, and nor did my wife. And so we took one day at a time, and some days are our songs, some days are diamonds, some days are stones, and you have to, you just realize that you have a daily responsibility to hear the heart of God. I wrote our wedding vows, and I just had scripture, and one of them was from Colossians, that we were going to commit to making Jesus preeminent in all things. And I've done countless weddings, and I always mention the same verse in those weddings where Paul, husbands, love your wives, Christ loved the church, wives, submit to your husbands. Let's put all that aside and the complications of that, and let's go back to the verse in verse 21 of Ephesians 5 where it says, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ, because Jesus is present. So
Thanks, Gary.
I don't
Hey,
have a formula.
Vacas, will you guys weigh in on this one? Because I know that you
Yeah.
guys are very intentional in your marriage
Yeah,
to work on it.
So this is something that I hope I don't get beat up in the parking lot afterwards for saying this, but one of the things, this is a hot button for me personally, because like for parents in the room, parenting is like 75% guilt and shame, right? Like you always feel like you're doing it wrong, and you always feel like someone else is doing it better.
Shaming the children.
Yeah, right. Yeah. And I think marriage is equal parts, right? Like I'm not a good enough husband, or I'm not a good enough wife, I'm not a good enough spouse. And we've been married, it'll be 23 years in December this year, so 22 years right now. And it's been tough, don't applaud. But we've been married for a long time, and I literally, probably for 21 of those 22 years, this is something that I have always felt like, man, we're not good at this. We're not good at the date night. And as a pastor and as a Christian, as someone who's been around conferences and talks and counselors and blah, 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 everybody's like, oh, you got to make the date night. Like, it's so important. I'm like, I know, but like, we're not good at it. And I think just recently, probably literally in the last 2 years, we figured out that date nights aren't our thing. But what is our thing is time together. And so, like, we will go out in the pool, and we float in the pool for hours, and we talk. And that's our date night. And so, like, for me, I had so much weight and so much guilt because I wasn't good at the date night. And so I've stopped saying that altogether. And I've said, like, figure out what works for you. Figure out what works for your relationship. And I think if you can figure out your thing, then all the rest of that question will figure itself out. Because you're parenting and you're working and you got all this other noise. But if you find your thing, it's not a chore. It's not a chore for us to go float in the pool. Like, we enjoy it. We look forward to it. And if we go a week or two without doing it, we're like, man, I feel like we need to go float, right? And it works. Find your thing. That's my thing. Give yourself grace in this thing.
Yeah, I mean, when they were younger, we didn't live here, so we didn't have a pool, right? But looking back on it, again, we never really called it date night. We did whatever we could do to have time together. So a lot of times it was going to the grocery store, right? Yeah. Like, we didn't have the privilege of having babysitters all the time. Yeah. And sometimes we had them for an hour because we needed to go get groceries, and that was the time that we got to spend together. So I think it's more about just finding that time.
And for us, it was couch. So when I came home from work, it was, kids, it's daddy and mommy time right now. Zach, just take it in the other room, you know? And so we had to reconnect for that even less than 20 minutes because we had no money, and we're not going on a date night, you know, so that you just can learn what your thing is.
Yeah.
I just want to say that as my wife and I have gotten older, we've spent a lot of time in doctor's offices together and the emergency room in the hospital. And I told her, I said, we don't have to have a date night anymore because we're always together.
Date nights are way more expensive now.
Those are some great answers. Thank you, guys. I think especially us young parents need to hear that stuff. Pivoting a little bit now, each of the people on this stage have raised some great kids. Like, really, really impressive. Each family had 3 kids in these families. They've raised some great kids. And so I want to hear from you guys, like, how you saw those kids develop, how you brought out the best in them, how you got to, understand their personalities. So I'm going to ask you guys some questions about these kind of things now. And so, Allan and Tammy, how did you figure out how God kind of uniquely crafted your kids? And how did you help point them in that direction? They're heading into college now. They're having to think about and answer these kind of questions. How did that play out for you guys?
I tried to just say things out loud. When I saw them be good at something, I'd say, Lila, you're really good at that artistic layout, and maybe that's something you want to think about more. And inevitably, they have not followed up on any of the things I've suggested, but I just speak it out, and then they choose.
Yeah, it was critical for us from early on. I can't remember who we learned this from, but that once you get into, I think from multiple people, once you get into middle school, high school, is you have to find something that you're interested in. That we are not going to, so I'm from Canada, and so I didn't force my boys to play hockey. They didn't, and I cry regularly about that. But we were very committed to not force them to do things we're interested in. But you've got to find something. You don't have to do the thing that I want you to do, but just try something. And if you change it in 2 months, that's fine. But you can't just sit around and play games or watch TV. When you get into particularly high school, it's the extra time that kills them. And so find something to do, whether it's your swimming or dancing or cross-country running, whatever your thing is. And our kids changed those things over time, but let them pick what it is, and then whatever they pick, we jumped on board and celebrated it and became, studious of it and experts on that thing or whatever. And if they wanted to change, that's fine, but you can't quit something until you have something else that you're going to do, because it's that dead time that kills them, that hurts them a lot.
Thanks. All right, Gary, I want to kind of follow that up with you because now your kids are like into their careers. They're adults. They're into their careers. And Gary has on one end of the spectrum, he's got a son who has taken the arts and that creativity and turned it into a career, and then another son who has succeeded in kind of the research realm, and then a daughter who is leading in the education field. And so how did you encourage their natural bent and see them grow into that?
Well, I just I can't. It's hard to answer the questions because the older you get, the more you realize that you did what you could and you were faithful to God, and there's nothing you could have done differently under the circumstances. I can just say that with my, in terms of ministry, and I said this earlier, I've been in the ministry, and I was the first grandchild. My grandfather was a pastor. My mother's two brothers were pastors. Both my great-grandfathers on my mother's side were pastors, and so. Now I'm pastoring a church, and is there an expectation that your kids go into ministry? And I had no expectation in that regard. In fact, with my oldest son Dave, he went to Biola University, and I told him, he felt a call in his life, but I told him, if you end up in the ministry, you can always go back to seminary and take graduate work, and just take something that can be functional for your life. So he majored in psychology, and then he was interested in the research element of psychology, and then when he was in college, he came to me and he said, I'd like to do like an internship at the church, and I right away said, oh, that's great, but not here, because it's so complicated when your dad is the senior pastor, and I had a big church, and so I talked to my friend Mark Buckley and had my son Dave volunteer for that church, we were in Mesa and Mark's in North Central Phoenix. So he drove over and he went to that church, and he had an opportunity to experience ministry without, creating the nepotism potential, And my daughter, she got hired. One of the guys on my staff hired her as his part-time secretary, and I didn't know he did that until after she got hired. And anyway, you want, and then just how, I can say how I came into ministry, how I became a pastor, first a youth pastor, and then I did a church plant, and all these things, just how the doors open, and you walk through the doors, and my kids, really, I can say the same thing about their lives, about how my daughter, for example, she has a master's degree in intercultural studies, an undergraduate degree in English, and then she has four kids, but she really likes to, likes to work, and she's had some, she's a very competent, but she just had, she told us one time she had like 30 different jobs, and none of them was productive, and some of them were miserable, and now she's got a tough job, but she's now an associate dean at a community college in Denver. So again, it's difficult it's difficult. You just have to stay open. I like to say you never know where the road of life is going to take you, and you have to stay open. And you got to work with your kids, and you got to understand that each one of them is different, and the personalities are different, and where they're going to end up, and who they're going to marry, all of those things. And you look back, and you just see the hand of God in what happens. So,
thanks, Gary. All right, I'm gonna throw this one out on the tail end because you just mentioned it, that kids have different personalities. So Jessie and Carla, how do you tailor your parenting to those different personalities of your kids?
Yeah, I think, so one of the things that Gary said that I think is so true, and you're a little older than me, obviously, but, I said obviously. But this is,
my son.
I'm done. Thanks, Dad. But one of the things that I've realized lately is, and I hope this is encouragement for the parents in the room, is there is a moment where you realize that you've done the best you could with what you had, and how you were raised, and your experience, and the different things and struggles that you have in your life. But at the end of the day, your kids are going to become who they are, right? Like, so if you have fantastic kids, it probably doesn't mean that you were a perfect parent. And if you have kids that have struggles, it probably doesn't mean you were a terrible parent. Sometimes kids develop into who they're going to become, as no matter how well you did or how poorly you did. And some of that, like Gary said, it doesn't have to do with us. And I think to this question, one of our learnings early on was that parenting isn't about us, right? It's not about what I want my kids to become. It's not who I want my children to be. It's not how I want the world to perceive them. It's really more about stewardship, right? It's these lives that you have been entrusted with, that you are trying to just nurture and guide to their fullest expression, right? To their truest self, and to who they are, and to how God's wired them and uniquely created them. And so, we have 3 kids, a 17-year-old girl who's super creative. She loves to write. She's very, very, very opinionated and very willing to share her opinion with you. Carla says that she's just like me, only the girl version, which I think is very rude. And then you've got our middle child, our oldest son. He's 15. He's going to be 16 in a few months. And could not be more different than her. He's not outspoken. He almost never speaks his mind. He's quiet and introverted. He's a deep thinker. He's really good at everything he's ever done. Like literally any sport, he's never played a sport before. He'll walk out in the field and kill it. And I don't understand that world. He's so good at stuff. And then our youngest son, he's 14. He's the comedian, right? He has a stand-up routine that he does when people come over. He has a massive personality. He will be on a stage someday. That's just, I can tell right now, that's what he's going to do. And part of what we've had to figure out is how to not impose our will on their development, right? I mean, if you think about your kids in terms of stages of physical development, right? You have to carry them everywhere, and then you're helping them stand and helping them take their first steps, and then holding their hand down the sidewalk, and then it's really about, then it takes off, right? You're making sure you put guardrails around, like, hey, don't cross the street without me, or hey, don't run too far ahead. And then it's about like, hey, make sure that you're home by dark, and then it's make sure you're home by 10, and then it's don't drive too fast, and all those kinds of things, right? And as they grow, and I think that kind of fostering their different personalities is a lot of the same way. It's not about you, right? It's not about me. It's not about what I want. Instead, it's about helping them become who God's created them to be, helping them with just guiding them and putting those guardrails in place and not telling them what to believe, but helping them understand who they are in God's eyes and how God's created them.
Thanks, Jesse. Let me ask a follow-up question, and I think we're going to kind of bounce around on the answer to this one. You just talked about guardrails. So each kid might have a different personality and a different future that God has laid out for them, and we want to support that, but they need some guardrails to protect them from kind of running off the rails or falling off the cliff or kind of going the wrong direction. And Scripture warns us not to exasperate our children, right? If we create too many rules, we can smother them and exasperate them, and you won't see them flourish. And so what were some key guardrails in your guys' households for your kids that you said, like, wow, that one really protected the kids, but gave them freedom, and we saw them flourish in the midst of it?
You want to start here and go down? What do you think? I have a few, and then you can say a few. The two of the biggest ones for us is no electronics in their bedrooms. They can't have phones or computers in their bedrooms in private spaces. They can only use them in public spaces. Obviously, I'm not naive. I understand that there are still other ways that things can happen, but that's just a general expectation. And again, this is who we are as a family. As a family, we interact with our devices in public spaces, right? As a family, they can see my phone, I can see their phone. It's just the deal. And then I think the other thing is we just erred on the side of no social media at all. So for us, it was, I've not read a single article that talks about the psychological benefits of social media on a child's development, and I've read 10,000 articles that talk about how bad it is and negative it is and the potential negative impacts. And the truth is, we don't know, right? It will be a generation before we fully understand and appreciate the impact of social media and things like that on child's development. And so I'm just going to err on the side of caution with that. And that's something that we just decided, like, you're not going to have it. And you're going to turn 18, and then you can TikTok away. But today, and as we exist right now, and when you're a minor and in my house, this is just not what we're going to do. And again, it's as a family. I personally don't love social media. I have to have it because of my job and who I am. But if I didn't have to have it, I wouldn't have it either. But those are two things for me.
I think for me is we are a family. We don't lie to each other. We are a very open and honest family, maybe even sometimes to a fault. But the kids know we don't lie to each other about anything. We don't sugarcoat things for them. But I think that has helped them be able to come and talk to us about things that some kids don't talk to their parents about. But that has been a big one in our family. We don't lie to each other.
In fact, let me tag on to that. Our children don't actually get punished for their mistakes. They get punished for lying about their mistakes. And so that's kind of an interesting framework that we have used is, if one of them has their phone in their room, it's not because they have their phone in their room, it's because I caught them with their phone in their room and they weren't honest about it, right? And so that's been another thing is we're very careful about behavior modification and more about motivation modification. I don't know if that makes sense.
I think that anybody who's raising kids now, as you are, Zach, is facing an array of challenges that we didn't face when I was raising our kids in the, late in the last century. Millennium, yeah, in the last few years of the last millennium. And all the social media has really made a change, and I see this with my grandchildren. I got 9 grandkids, and they're 10 up to 24. And my son David said this. I mean, he spent his life basically studying the young generation in regards to faith and everything else. He does national surveys. And, he basically, I just said some dumb things, I guess. I can't even remember what they were, but he responded. He said, Dad, he said, your progeny they're all going in a different direction. And he understands this because of his studies and his. And so, for example, and I could suggest a helpful resource. So, his most recent book is called Faith for Exiles, and the image there is the Jewish community living in captivity as exiles in Babylon, and they had to learn how to live in a completely pagan world. And so the subtitle of the book, Faith for Exiles, is How to Follow Jesus in Digital Babylon. And so, I think as parents now, you need to understand what, you can't just assume things. You really need to take the time to, like you talked about, you've taken some time you want to know what's going on out there that's influencing our kids. Everything from TikTok to sex, what's going on out there. And as you find out about it, you will be increasingly appalled, especially if you're older. My son David, he just talks about, with all of his research, he talks about, he just says, it's time for Armageddon. It's just, everything is just so crazy. So, I can't, we had boundaries, just personally, we had boundaries about, I used to tell the kids, you can stay out as late as you want, just tell us when you're going to come home and let us know if it's going to get later. And, things like that. And we let them make choices, and, I can't remember really trying to shape their future. They've got to make choices, and you have to release that to God. And, we had boundaries, what happens in our home. But again, there was no social media. Just my youngest son, who's in the Navy now, he spent a lot of time with a computer with video games. I got a little touch of that when our Atari came out, and I had a thumb problem from playing Atari. But that's much. I used to say, Matt, we can't find Matt, and we found out that he was actually inside the computer, and we had to somehow extract him. So there are just things that need to be understood.
Yeah.
Did we say enough here?
Yeah, that was great, Gary. Do you guys have any boundaries that worked really well for your family, Allan and Tammy? Any guardrails? No?
I think a big one for us was be responsible. If you're, and how does that play out? We told our kids, you're going to be head and shoulders above the rest of the world if you're just be responsible. And so we worked on that. We worked on how we build metal in you. How do you get thick-skinned? How do you get durable emotionally, mentally? So on the flip side of, the guardrail kind of concept, there's the positive side is work on those other attributes as well.
My mom was always about the next program. There was a new one that would debut about every Saturday. That's when she had time to tell us about it. But one that made a big impact on me is she really guarded what we said, how we talked to each other as a family. We had like a whole list of things you can say and can't say to each other that was on the refrigerator growing up, and those were guardrails about how we would treat and talk to each other with our words. And that was a really good one. All right, last question that I think we have time for today, and is one that went really well first service, and so I'm going to go for it again. But what's your biggest regret as a parent, and what would you do differently if you could do it all over again?
We just finished reading a book about feelings, and it sounds like Allan and I are both thinkers and more on the math side of things, and I think we have prided ourselves on that and not being feelers. But now I regret that. I regret that I didn't foster that balance in my life, and so I'm trying to use more feeling words and comfort physically with my kids, even though they're in college age. Actually, this morning, I totally messed up again, and my son came down and said, I'm tired. And rather than acknowledging those feelings and just being there in that moment, I tried to fix it. And it's just my natural go-to, and I still want to correct myself and change my parenting even though they're in college, and we're not done.
I guess I would encourage you to, Hillary's in the room, and she's the number 3, so you start out with a couple of boys, and you're very male-oriented in what's interesting to your family and how you do your vacations and all that sort of thing. And so just pay attention to all those kids and give them equal time and interest. And Hillary and I had some awesome experience together with horses and such, but sometimes I wish I had done more with the youngest.
One of the things that we have done recently with our older, now that our kids are older, is we've asked them what they have observed that we have not done well, and what would they. It's really been a rich conversations, because it fosters the openness and the honesty between us. So we've really enjoyed those conversations, and one of the things that consistently across the board, directed to the male part of the parent, me, is that I would lecture too much. And so that, something would happen, and so I'm as a pastor, I use words, and so my default is that the more words I say, the more helpful I can be. and that's so wrong. And so often my kids, they knew they did something wrong. They're already feeling it. They're already experiencing it. They're harder on themselves than what we have to be at times, particularly, one of our kids. And so the last thing they need is a lecture from me. And so what I've learned and therefore regret is that it would be better for me to have fewer lectures and ask more questions.
What works in the pulpit doesn't work at the kitchen table.
Yes, sir.
Or the boardroom, or So
The bedroom.
yeah.
Just the pulpit. It's just
Yes.
the pulpit.
Okay. I'm just going to pass the mic here. I said in the early service that sometimes I just regret. I've just got this type A personality and have been very achievement oriented, and I have very high expectations of myself. And I wish I had exercised more restraint, just in the home and with my wife. And I feel like after all these years, we've been married for 51 years, and so I look back and it gets back to this simple principle of bringing Jesus into every moment, and taking a deep breath. The Sabbath, the Hebrew word Sabbath means literally to pause, and we would say count to 10 before you talk, and just inviting Jesus into the stress, into the moment. Jesus said to Martha, 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 you are. She just wanted Mary to help in the kitchen, but Jesus saw that was a symptom of her of the way she lived her life, and he said, you are anxious and troubled about many things. And she didn't even have a cell phone. Okay. So, just to disengage and just to say, let's just stop here. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Don't let the sun go down on your wrath, all of those wonderful boundaries. So I wanted to say, as you get older, now we have 9 grandchildren, and you feel almost as involved with your grandchildren as you do with your children. And so now sometimes you will overstep yourself, and your children really don't want you messing with their children, even though you're the grandma and grandpa. And I like to say this: the one good thing about grandchildren is that they teach your children how hard it is to raise children. And your children become more grateful to you for what they put you through. So I like to say this, that grandchildren are a fulfillment of a promise in the Bible. Vengeance is mine, says the Lord. I will repay.
That's good. I guess my biggest regret, I'm going to change my answer from this morning, and I'm going to morph it with something else I said. But, you know, one of the biggest pieces of advice is, I see this young couple over here that have the little baby. Yep. And one of the pieces of advice I got, we both got whenever we were in that stage right there, from all the old people that we didn't care what they had to say. One of the pieces of advice that we always got was cherish every moment, right? And I didn't appreciate that until like a year ago. And you know, I feel like my whole parenting life was rushing through one moment to get to the next one, right? Like it's like, okay, now you can feed yourself, awesome. Now you can go to the bathroom by yourself, awesome. Now you can like entertain yourself, awesome, right? Like, and it's just rushing through every stage, because you have a goal for their development, and you're also have a life and a career and a marriage and things, and so it would be really helpful if they would just get through this early stuff quick. And so for me, man, if there's anything I could do in the world, my biggest regret if I go back and do it all over again, I would be present in those moments. I would give anything to be able to hold, you know, my kids at that age. That, like, I would love that because I would appreciate it at a totally different place than I did then. And so I don't know. I wish that I could go back and somehow communicate to the younger me, like, hey, that's not dumb advice. That's not something that everybody says to everybody. Everybody does say it to everybody because it's true. And man, I wish I had known that.
For me, it was not teaching the kids enough about personal finances. As they've been growing up most of the years, Jessie was a pastor, and so we had nothing, right? Living paycheck to paycheck most of the time. And so I didn't really feel like I had anything to teach them. But if I could go back, I would teach them about our personal finances and open up to them about that, so that they could learn with us and make them more successful than we were.
Thank you, guys. I love the way you finished us off there, Carla, that learn with us. I felt like my parents did a really good job of that, that we were growing in our faith together. We were learning as a family together and growing up together, and that kind of humility of that journey built a lot of security for me in the process, a lot of trust in our family. And so would you guys give these guys a round of applause as we're about to dismiss? You guys, thank you so much for coming up. Proverbs tells us that wisdom can be found when we find some really, really good mentors, some people who can give us good advice. And you always have to weigh that out, kind of like Jessie was alluding to. With a lot of people will tell you a lot of things, and you need to vet it out, compare it up to Scripture and stuff like that. But we need to find people like this in our lives to help influence us with some really, really good, best practices and advice. And so I want to thank you guys for coming today, and thank you for pouring into us. And I have another group of people that I want to thank as well this morning. Today is one of those weekends where we remember those who gave us the opportunity to be here together without having to worry about, like violence being dropped on us. And so if there is anybody in your family or because it's a family ordeal, or if you personally served in the military, we just want to give you a round of applause this morning and thank you for your service. Thank you guys very much.